We're going to turn our country around. I will end inflation very quickly. You know how we're going to end it? By drilling and drilling and drill. Energy is going to bring everything down. Energy is going to bring it down.
When I look at the outlook with regard to tariffs and the imposition of tariffs, clearly there is a negotiation going on before this administration even takes its reins at the controls in order to try to morph conditions in the direction they would like to see it go. With Mexico and Canada, there was a clear caveat last night that was suggested relating to the flow of migrants across the border and the flow of drugs across the borders. So clearly, there's some evidence here that it's not just about trade; it's about using trade as a means to accomplish something that this administration would like to see happen, which is to slow the tide of illegal immigration across the border, as well as slow the tide of illicit drugs across the borders. You can argue that there's certainly more pressure to the southern border than the northern border, but I clearly think they want to make sure to both of the countries we share very large borders with that this is a real important focus of the U.S. upcoming administration, and I think he's managing to telegraph that signal. With regard to China, it's a very, very different situation. And to be honest with you, everyone's been imposing tariffs on China left and right, whether it was the Trump administration starting it and then the Biden administration continuing it. I don't think there's any surprise there with regard to the Chinese tariff situation. Well, I mean, it's very, very clear that every country that has substantial manufacturing on each side of the border would be affected. But you also have to understand, given the weakness in global economic activity, it's hard for these suppliers to not absorb some of the cost of the tariffs. This is what happened in 2016. And if you remember, in 2016, the global economy was stronger than it is today. And yet the imposition of tariffs did not have the inflation consequences that people had implied. And we also don't know whether or not these tariffs will be applied to everything, or whether these tariffs will be applied to goods that are just reassembled or assembled in Mexico and come back along the border or in Canada. It remains to be seen what the devil is in the details. Clearly, there's a lot of automobile related activity that goes on between the United States, Mexico, and the United States and Canada. That's why I was saying it depends on how that's done, what's carved out, what's not carved out in terms of the tariffs. So again, until you see the actual details, it's hard to make an assessment as to where we're actually going with this. And if it's simply product that's assembled overseas and then brought back, or it's raw materials that come in to be assembled here after certain product finishing is just taking place in these other countries. Again, it's a difficult concept to wrap your arms around until you've seen the details. And that's why we're being very, very cautious in terms of making all sorts of predictions about inflation as a result of it. Everyone has recognized that China has certain issues that they're uncomfortable with, and everyone has been pushing back on China. And to be honest with you, COVID did China it was a big negative hit to China, not only because of what it did to the domestic economy, but what it did in terms of forcing people to diversify supply chains. So China's not as big a deal today as it was prior to COVID. And prior to when Donald Trump first imposed the tariffs in 2016. So we're a long way away from where we were. So again, the impact on China in a world of global excess supply of tradable goods, where their manufacturing is being hollowed out anyway, and it's coming from all sorts of directions, it's a bigger problem for China than just the United States. Again, this is the conversation we've been having about whether or not the consumer will pay for it. Will it be absorbed in margins? Will there be some redistribution of how the products are shipped into the U.S.? Look, we went out and we eliminated Russian oil supposedly from the marketplace, yet it didn't happen. So it remains to be seen how this actually translates into final goods prices. And I'm a little bit skeptical of all the back of the envelope calculations that are being done, primarily because we don't know how suppliers are going to react. And we also know people are creative, very creative at trying to find ways around these kind of programs.
And I will stop the invasion of criminals coming across our border. I will strengthen our military. I will restore peace in the world. And I will rescue the American dream. We're going to have the American dream back soon. Together, we will begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country.